Students, an important concept in the TCP/IP protocol suite is that of encapsulation and decapsulation. Each of the layers that we are talking about, 5 layers in the TCP/IP protocol suite, receives the data or the packet from the upper layer and adds a layer-specific header to that packet or the message. This encapsulation process, adding a particular header as per the layer into the message, is called encapsulation. And the corresponding decapsulation process at the receiving end, which includes taking off the header that was put on by the corresponding layer at the source. It makes possible the communication, the layered communication that we accomplish using TCP/IP protocol suite. Students, slide पे चलेंगे और देखेंगे कि किस तरह से ये encapsulation होती है at the source and how it's done at the connecting device, and therefore how the decapsulation is done at the destination end. Students, once again, we are taking the same example that we have discussed so far. We have got a source host, we have got a router in between, and we have got destination host. Once again, we have removed the switches from this example, and the reason for that is the switches, they do not take part in encapsulation and decapsulation. The switches just forward the data that they receive, and they do not change the form of the data. Students, source host, 5 layers, application layer of the source host generates a message. The message goes to the transport layer, and the transport layer encapsulates the message by adding a header, a transport layer specific header represented by number 4 here, to this message. Students, this message, this segment then comes to the network layer, and network layer then adds its own header, which is represented by number 3 here. Students, this datagram then comes to data link layer, and data link layer adds its own specific header before this goes to the physical layer. Students, the process of encapsulation. Every layer encapsulates the received message or the packet by adding its own layer specific header to that packet. Students, the physical layer then transmits this to the router. The router receives this packet, looks at the network layer header, and then forwards it on. At the receiving end, as you can see, the physical layer receives it. The data link layer is now decapsulating this. It is stripping off the header that was put onto the message by the source end. So you can see at the receiving end, this data link header, number 2, that was put on by the data link at the source host is taken out. And the datagram with only 3 and 4 as the headers end up at the network layer. Now, students, network layer takes off the network layer header from the source host, and you end up with a segment or a user datagram. And ultimately, the transport strips off the last header, which is the transport layer header put on by the source host, and the message is delivered to the application. Students, this is the process of encapsulation and decapsulation. As you can see, number 2 is the header at the data link layer, number 3 is the header at the network layer, and number 4 is the header at the transport layer. There is no header that's added at the physical layer. We just use to transport bits at the physical layer. Now, students, after the process of encapsulation and decapsulation, another concept which is very important is the concept of addressing. When you work with a network of at least 2 devices, you will have at least the source address and the destination address. In addition to that, every layer has got a certain address for the data or the packet that's received by a particular layer. It adds a particular address to it. This address is then used to identify where this particular frame or datagram or segment is headed towards. Students, slide की जानिब चलते हैं, and we'll look at an example of how this addressing is done in the TCP/IP protocol suite. Students, as you can see, starting from the physical layer, the packet names are bits, no addresses. At the data link layer, we have the object or the packet name as frame, and we have got the link layer addresses that are used to identify the frames at the data link layer. Students, then you have got the network layer, and we have got the datagram and the logical addresses. Students, then we have got the transport layer, segment is what we call it, and we have got the port numbers. And last but not the least, we have got a message at the application layer, and the names is what we call the addresses that we use. For example, for an email, you have the name at the rate of whatever the server is. So students, आपने देखा कि the addresses are required even though there is a logical connection between the respective layers in the source and the destination side. Each of the two systems, there is a source system and there is a destination system, and each of these layers are represented by these addresses.